Welcome to IT Management. We're continuing right now in our project management section of this training, if you will. And I want to talk about another, what I think has turned into clickbait, and that is Agile Dead? And a lot of these videos that I do, before I do them, especially the controversial ones like this one, I try to watch as many videos as I can of people making the case and be open-minded about this. And this is a dark hole for me because a lot of the people suggesting Agile is dead are really sure of themselves. I just watched one video, and it was a half hour long, about this guy telling how these big corporations don't know what they're doing and they're not really agile and Scrum's a problem. I always try to tell people, even with me, when you're watching somebody like this who's putting themselves out there as an expert, always take that with a grain of salt. There's no way to do something like this without you drawing on your own personal experiences. And what worries me about these clickbaity type videos, and that may not be the intention, but they are, is they're looking at this from the perspective of they were always in these big giant companies and they're mad because the whole thing wasn't perfectly agile and they had rules and processes. Well, of course you do. And I just watched one, I couldn't believe what this fella says. And he was an older guy. And he said the whole organization has to buy into the Agile methodology. That's patently ridiculous. Here's why. I don't care how small or big your customer or your company is. Your customer is part of the organization. You don't have any control over that. So that's the first problem with it. The second problem I see in this is Agile dead and we need to go back to waterfall or do this is it's called Chesterton's fence. Why do you think people went to Agile in the first place? If you think there's this great problem with Agile or Scrum, you have to go through the Chesterton's fence arguments. Before we moved this, why was it put in? Well, because waterfall had some real limitations. And to extrapolate that, those limitations ran the gamut of business. Small businesses and big businesses had the same problem with waterfall. Waterfall's great in certain things, but it was always the scope changed. That's what drove Agile in the first place. So then another one I was watching, this guy was really down on Scrum Masters because they weren't sticking to their own framework, I guess. And the big one, and I see this, I wrote this down, I know what it is, it's customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Meaning, let's not worry about the contract negotiation, let's just worry about being engaged, transparent with the customer. Great advice. And you can implement that in fantasy land. And I don't mean to sound like Rodney Dangerfield in Back to School, but it's true. That's never been a thing. That doesn't mean spend whatever you want, get the project perfect, add any feature you want into the software, let the developers run the project. No. There is no customer in the world you're ever going to get that says, well, let's not worry about the money. That doesn't exist. They had a budget when they went in there. That's why at the end of your project, when you have things in the PBI, that product backlog, that's where these are all the things we need to do. Every project that you ever finish, there's going to be things left there. And people complain about that. So, well, we didn't really do Agile. We didn't really do Scrum. Well, sure you did. You just had limits on it. And that limit was probably money. So Agile's not dead. And Agile is a verb. It's nimble, flexible. Think of all those things. And some of this I get. The problem with some of these Scrum Masters, I've worked with them, they're really good at what they do. But they become too in tune to the process of Scrum itself. We need to do this, then we need to do this, then we need to do this. Most companies, the vast majority of companies are smaller businesses. There's only so many Googles and Ford Motor Companies in the world. Most companies are a little bit smaller, and you have to have some process around Agile. It's ridiculous to think that's what just chaos is. And that became a thing a couple years ago. People realized if you stuck too closely into not being stuck to anything closely, you just had chaos. There are going to be fences, gates around your any project you do. And the first is money. And the second is, and this gets me to, and I get it, and I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but a lot of bigger companies, and by bigger I mean $50-60 million, that have run a business for a certain way for 20 or 30 years, of course they're going to be slow to change. Tradition gets a kind of a bad name to it. It's almost a slur. Well, you're too traditional. Again, I go back to Chesterton fence. Why was that put in place in the first place? And just to knock it all down and say, well, we're gonna do it this way, agile, meaning we don't even want Scrum anymore. We just want to. That's not going to work. There are both traditional fences put into place around you to keep you going, and new fences that come up that may not have been that way all the time, but they're there for a reason. And what you really want to watch in particular is these people telling you Agile's dead, this, that, and the other, that slam the executive leadership of the company. I've said this before, as a manager, you are going to run into this same thing. The vice president of a the vice president of a $50 million company does not have the time to explain to you why every decision was made. So that's the first part of it, is understand that this agile framework or idea came about because there were weaknesses within waterfall. But nobody wanted to initially just knock down the waterfall. Well, it wasn't because they were old, stodgy conservatives. It was because they know that those processes were put in place for a good reason. And you should respect that. That's one of the core values of any project management philosophy. You should respect other people's opinions and thoughts. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them all the time, but they're there for a reason. So that's the first point I wanted to make. This one's going to be probably a couple videos, because this has been going on for about 8 years now, maybe even longer, but it's not dead. It's not going anywhere because it does work. But there are going to be processes that have to, out of necessity of business, constrain that a little bit. And those constraints are not the end of the world. It doesn't mean we're going back to the old ways. But your idea of what exactly Agile is going to be different from somebody. Your idea of what nimble means. And you want to avoid that chaos. So take a lot of this with a grain of salt. I've been doing this for far too long, and I've seen far too much success with this Scrum method. There's some great things in there. It has worked, and it will continue to evolve just like everything does. So this is just a quick introduction to it. We'll get more and more into the project management aspect. I saw another video guy just ramming on any company that would ever have a project manager and say they're agile. That's ridiculous. You're still going to need project managers on a lot of projects.